They say pain changes people, but for Keanu Reeves, it didn't change him, it revealed who he truly was. He's worth hundreds of millions, yet he still rides the subway, gives away his money, and treats strangers like friends. Behind that calm smile is a man who's faced more loss than most could survive, a father who vanished, a best friend gone too soon, a child he never got to hold, and a woman he loved who never made it home. But through it all, he never screamed, never sought pity, never let bitterness win. Instead, he turned tragedy into compassion and silence into strength, becoming the kind hero who lost everything. Every gesture of kindness you've seen from him hides a pain he learned to carry with grace, and that's what makes this story so powerful. Because this isn't about fame or money or even success, it's about how one man's heartbreak built the world's most beloved soul. In a city obsessed with ego, he became proof that kindness can survive catastrophe. So don't skip this video, because what happens in the final moments changes everything you think you know about him. Stay until the end, because Keanu Reeves' story isn't just emotional, it's unforgettable. Keanu Reeves' early life wasn't glamorous, it was unstable. He was born in Beirut, Lebanon, in 1964. His mother, Patricia Taylor, worked as a costume designer. His father, Samuel Reeves, was a geologist who became involved with drugs and was later imprisoned for possession. When Keanu was only 3 years old, his father left the family completely. That single event shaped almost everything about him. It taught him early that people can disappear without warning. His mother moved wherever work took her, first Australia, then New York, finally Toronto. By the time he was a teenager, he had lived in several countries and attended more than half a dozen schools. He never built long friendships because each time he did, the family packed up again. Teachers remember him as quiet, polite, and constantly trying to adapt to new accents and systems. Academically, he struggled. Dyslexia made reading slow and frustrating, and being labeled not smart at a young age cut deep. Instead of fighting the system, he found comfort in movement hockey, drama classes, anything that gave him purpose. Hockey became his first love. He played goalie with intensity, earning the nickname The Wall. But a serious injury ended that dream, and that loss forced him to search for a new outlet. Acting filled that space. Even as a teenager, he carried the kind of calm that comes from surviving chaos. He didn't talk much about his father, and whenever reporters later asked, his answers were short and distant. Friends from Toronto said he always seemed older than his age, not in confidence, but in awareness. He knew life could change overnight, and that mindset never left him. If you look closely at his interviews today, you still see that quiet distance, the pauses before he answers, the careful choice of words. That emotional restraint comes from those years of instability, learning that silence keeps you safe when the world around you isn't predictable. By the time he reached his 20s, Keanu had already learned 3 hard lessons that would define the rest of his life: that love can vanish, that home can disappear, and that peace has to be created, not given. Those lessons didn't come from scripts or mentors, they came from surviving his own beginnings. And just when his life started to feel steady, something unexpected happened, a friendship that finally made him believe in connection again. But as he would soon learn, even that bond wasn't meant to last. Keanu's rise in Hollywood wasn't instant fame, it was persistence. In the mid-1980s, he started landing small television roles in Canada. His early performances were inconsistent, but directors noticed his sincerity. He wasn't the most trained actor, but he had something rare: authenticity. That genuine nature would later become the foundation of his career. His first major breakthrough came in 1989 with Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. The film's goofy humor could have made him a one-dimensional surfer-type actor, but audiences instantly connected with his warmth and innocence. It wasn't acting as much as it was Keanu, just being Keanu kind, curious, and slightly out of sync with the Hollywood stereotype. The movie became a surprise hit, and suddenly, he was a global name. But success didn't change him. He was still quiet, still humble, still more comfortable on a motorcycle than at a red carpet event. After Bill and Ted, Hollywood wanted to shape him into a commercial star. He took roles in Point Break and Speed, films that defined early, 90s action cinema. Speed made him an international sensation. The soft-spoken Canadian kid was now the face of adrenaline-filled blockbusters. But instead of chasing celebrity status, Keanu often turned down scripts that didn't feel right. That choice confused studios but made sense to those who knew him. He wasn't chasing money or fame, he was chasing peace of mind. It was during this period that he met River Phoenix, a friendship that would define one of the most important chapters of his life. The two actors met while working on I Love You to Death and later starred together in Gus Van Sant's My Own Private Idaho. Both were young, talented, and uncomfortable with Hollywood's shallow culture. They bonded instantly, no ego, no competition, just understanding. Keanu often said River reminded him that sensitivity wasn't weakness. The two would spend hours talking about art, music, and how success could destroy authenticity. They were similar souls navigating an industry built on pressure. People close to them described their bond as brotherhood, the kind you don't find twice in life. Keanu finally had someone who understood the emotional side of fame, someone who didn't expect him to perform off-screen. Then, in October 1993, that bond was cut short. River Phoenix collapsed outside the Viper Room in Los Angeles after a drug overdose. He was only 23. The news hit Hollywood hard, but for Keanu, it was personal devastation. He didn't make statements, didn't attend interviews, didn't seek sympathy, he just disappeared for weeks. When he eventually returned to work, those who saw him described a different man, quieter, slower to smile, and carrying a kind of sadness that never really left his eyes. That loss was a turning point. It reinforced everything his childhood had already taught him, that people leave, and you can't control when. It also deepened his sense of empathy. Those close to him said he became more giving after River's death, almost as if he was trying to honor his friend by living the way River believed people should, with kindness first. In Hollywood, where every friendship comes with a contract, Keanu's loyalty made him an outlier. He didn't build alliances for power or career gain, he valued people simply for being human. River's passing left a void, but it also became a quiet motivation for how Keanu lived the rest of his life, detached from fame, focused on meaning, and always searching for peace. And just when it seemed he was finding balance again, success would come knocking in a way that even he couldn't ignore. The Matrix was about to rewrite everything he thought he knew about life, fame, and loss. By the late 1990s, Keanu Reeves had already proven himself as more than just the surfer guy from Bill and Ted or the action hero from Speed. But what happened next would take him from Hollywood star to cultural icon. When The Matrix released in 1999, it changed everything, not only for cinema but for Keanu himself. The film's philosophy, visuals, and message about control and reality connected with an entire generation. Overnight, he became the face of something much bigger than entertainment. He was no longer just an actor, he was a symbol of rebellion, choice, and freedom. But while the world was watching him rise, his real life was moving in the opposite direction. The same year audiences were calling him a legend, Keanu was quietly visiting hospitals. His younger sister, Kim, had been battling leukemia for years, and her condition often worsened while he was filming. Instead of celebrating premieres, he spent long nights by her bedside, reading to her or helping fund her treatments. Most fans didn't know it then, but a large part of his paycheck from The Matrix went to cancer research. He wasn't doing it for headlines, he was doing it because his own family needed hope. At that moment, he was living two lives, the one people saw and the one he couldn't talk about. On screen, he was Neo, humanity's savior. Off-screen, he was a brother trying to keep someone he loved alive. It's a contrast that shaped him deeply. Fame gave him money, but grief gave him meaning. And instead of letting success harden him, it humbled him. His generosity during The Matrix production became legendary. He gave away a significant portion of his earnings, tens of millions, to the special effects and costume teams, saying they were the real reason the movie worked. For most people, that kind of sacrifice would be unthinkable. For him, it was just common sense. Still, fame carries its own curse. As the Matrix franchise exploded, the pressure around him grew. Reporters wanted more interviews. Studios wanted sequels. Everyone wanted a piece of him. But Keanu had never been comfortable in the spotlight. He didn't buy a mansion, didn't throw parties, didn't live like the superstar he'd become. He still took public transport, still spoke softly, still treated everyone the same way he always had. People close to him said he felt disconnected from the Hollywood system. The industry celebrated him as Neo, but he never saw himself as anything more than an ordinary man doing his job. The irony is that the movie about escaping control ended up trapping him in a new kind of system celebrity worship. Journalists would describe him as distant or mysterious, but the truth was simpler. He just didn't need attention to feel alive. He'd already learned from his father's absence and River Phoenix's death that everything in life is temporary, so instead of chasing fame, he chased inner peace. Even as The Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions began filming, Keanu's focus wasn't on becoming richer or more famous. He used his downtime to check on his sister's progress, to keep his circle small, and to avoid the Hollywood noise that consumes so many others. While his peers were collecting awards, he was quietly helping charities without ever attaching his name. It wasn't humility as an act, it was his nature. The world saw The Matrix as a story about breaking free from illusion, but for Keanu, it was personal. The illusion was success itself. Everyone believed he had everything, but he knew how fragile it all was. Behind the red carpets and magazine covers, he was still that same quiet boy who learned how to keep moving through loss. And just when he thought he'd found balance again, life reminded him that even legends can break. Because right after The Matrix made him one of the most famous men on Earth, he was about to face a tragedy that would test him in ways no movie ever could. In the late 1990s, when Keanu Reeves was at the peak of his career, he met someone who changed his life completely, actress and production assistant Jennifer Syme. She wasn't a celebrity in the traditional sense, but she was well known in Hollywood circles for her quiet intelligence and kind personality. Friends said Keanu was instantly drawn to her calmness. She wasn't impressed by his fame, and that's exactly what he needed. For the first time in years, he wasn't Keanu Reeves, the movie star. He was just Keanu, a man who finally felt seen for who he really was. Their relationship grew quickly but quietly. Keanu, who was known for being intensely private, started appearing more relaxed. Close friends recall that she brought lightness back into his life after years of emotional distance. By 1999, they were expecting their first child, a daughter they planned to name Ava Archer Syme Reeves. For a man who had spent most of his life surrounded by loss, this felt like a new beginning. It was his chance at stability, at building the family he never had. But just weeks before the due date, everything changed. In December 1999, their baby was stillborn. The loss devastated both of them. People close to Keanu say he shut down emotionally. The grief was too much to process. Jennifer, too, struggled deeply. Their relationship slowly broke under the weight of silence and sorrow, but the love between them never truly disappeared. Even after they separated, they remained close, checking in on each other, still bonded by tragedy. Then, in April 2001, another tragedy struck. Jennifer was driving home after a party in Los Angeles when her car collided with parked vehicles. She was killed instantly. Keanu received the news early that morning. There were no statements, no interviews, no public appearances. He canceled all upcoming work and withdrew completely from the spotlight. For months, he lived in near silence, spending time alone or visiting his sister. To this day, he rarely speaks about Jennifer. But those who knew him during that period describe him as a man who aged emotionally overnight. When Keanu eventually returned to public life, there was something permanently different in him, a kind of quiet sadness that never really faded. You can see it in his eyes during interviews from the early 2000s, the pause before answering questions, the gentle tone, the compassion in his words. He wasn't acting. That was a man who had learned what real loss feels like. Jennifer's death changed how Keanu viewed everything: fame, love, and even time itself. He stopped chasing the future and started valuing presence. He once said in an interview, "Grief changes shape, but it never ends." That sentence alone explains why he never remarried, never built the kind of public romantic life people expected from him. To him, love wasn't a performance, it was sacred, and once broken, it could never be replaced. This period also shaped his humanitarian side. He became more giving, more patient, more empathetic toward everyone he met. People around him noticed how he'd go out of his way to help strangers, not because of publicity, but because he genuinely understood pain. Losing Jennifer and their child left a permanent mark, but it also deepened his humanity. He wasn't the same man who starred in Speed or The Matrix. He was quieter now, slower to trust, but faster to show compassion. And while many assumed his career would fade with his grief, the opposite happened. That pain would eventually fuel one of the most emotionally powerful comebacks in Hollywood history, a role that would blur the line between fiction and his own life. Because the next time Keanu Reeves picked up a script, it wasn't just another movie. It was therapy disguised as a revenge story, and the world would soon know it as John Wick. After losing both his daughter and Jennifer Syme within just 2 years, Keanu Reeves entered one of the quietest and most misunderstood periods of his life. To the outside world, it seemed like he simply disappeared. He wasn't attending red carpet events, wasn't giving interviews, and rarely accepted new roles. But privately, he was trying to rebuild his sense of purpose in a world that no longer made sense. Friends later said that during this time, Keanu lived almost like a ghost, avoiding attention, walking alone through Los Angeles, eating at small diners, and spending most of his days reading or riding his motorcycle. He wasn't running from fame, he was running from noise. He avoided the kind of spotlight most celebrities chase. He turned down major roles that didn't feel meaningful and rejected opportunities that would have made him wealthier. He didn't want distraction, he wanted peace. People close to him say he often spent hours sitting in silence, reflecting on the people he'd lost. That inner stillness wasn't sadness, though, it was survival. For Keanu, isolation became a form of healing. The entertainment industry, however, couldn't understand it. Hollywood thrives on visibility, but Keanu wanted the opposite. His refusal to play the fame game made him something rare, a superstar who didn't need validation. This was also the period when the public started to see glimpses of the man behind the myth. Small moments began surfacing online, fans sharing stories of how he gave up his subway seat for strangers, tipped restaurant staff thousands of dollars, or quietly donated to children's hospitals without ever mentioning his name. One story that went viral years later told how he bought motorcycles for the entire stunt team of The Matrix Reloaded as a thank you. At first, people thought these were exaggerated internet tales, but the truth is, most of them were real. His kindness wasn't calculated, it was instinctive. Around 2009, a single photo changed the internet's perception of him, Keanu, sitting on a park bench, eating a sandwich alone. The image spread worldwide with the caption, "Sad Keanu." People turned it into memes and jokes, but they missed what was really there. That photo wasn't sadness, it was solitude. It showed a man comfortable in his own company, someone who didn't need an entourage to feel human. Ironically, that viral image made millions of people feel closer to him, because it represented something honest that even the most famous among us can be quietly human. In interviews from that period, Keanu's responses were minimal but profound. When asked about loneliness, he said, "You need to be happy being alone if you want to survive in this world." That wasn't a movie line, it was experience speaking. His isolation wasn't depression, it was a choice to exist on his own terms. He still supported his sister through her ongoing recovery, stayed close to his mother, and worked on small independent projects. But there was no rush to return to global fame. He didn't owe the world entertainment, he owed himself healing. This quiet decade also marked a shift in how audiences viewed him. Instead of fading away, he became a cultural symbol of humility and kindness. People began to compare him to an older kind of celebrity, the kind who let actions speak louder than interviews. Fans admired how he never used tragedy for sympathy or fame. He simply lived with it gracefully. That authenticity created a bond that no marketing campaign could buy. But as the years passed, something unexpected happened. A script would arrive, one that mirrored his own pain almost too perfectly. A story about a man who loses everything and fights his way back, not for revenge, but for peace. The role would reignite his career, reshape his public image, and prove that sometimes the quietest people make the loudest comeback. And for Keanu Reeves, that comeback would be named John Wick. By 2013, Keanu Reeves had spent more than a decade quietly existing on the edges of Hollywood. He wasn't forgotten, just misunderstood. The industry saw him as a recluse, but those who followed his journey knew he was rebuilding himself privately, far from fame. Then, a script landed on his desk that would unexpectedly reconnect him with the world, John Wick. The story of a man who loses his wife and the life he built, only to be pulled back into violence, felt eerily familiar. It wasn't just another action role, it was a mirror of his own grief. Keanu connected to it instantly. He once said he felt protective of the character because it came from a place he understood all too well: loss, pain, and resilience. When production began, Keanu threw himself into the work with an intensity that surprised even the stunt team. He trained for months in martial arts, firearms, and tactical movement, refusing to use stunt doubles for most of the fight scenes. Behind the camera, there were no diva moments, no ego, just discipline. Crew members often said he was the first to arrive, the last to leave, and always humble. For him, the role wasn't about proving anything to Hollywood, it was about reclaiming his purpose. Years of grief had stripped away ambition, but this film gave him something to fight for again. When John Wick released in 2014, expectations were low. It wasn't backed by a major franchise, and Keanu hadn't had a blockbuster hit in years. But the movie exploded far beyond predictions. Audiences connected not just with the action, but with the emotion beneath it, a man channeling heartbreak into motion. Keanu didn't need to act pain, he lived it. That authenticity made every silent stare, every moment of grief on screen feel real. The world saw a fictional assassin, but what they were really watching was a man finally expressing the emotion he had carried for decades. What followed became known as the Keanuissance, a massive career revival that reintroduced him to a new generation. Suddenly, social media was filled with admiration for his humility, generosity, and emotional honesty. Clips of him signing autographs politely, waiting in line like anyone else, or refusing special treatment went viral. He didn't change for the industry changed its view of him. Young fans who didn't grow up with The Matrix began seeing him as something rare in Hollywood, authentic. But even with success returning, Keanu didn't let it consume him. He didn't buy mansions or luxury cars. Instead, he used his earnings to continue funding cancer research, to quietly support his sister's recovery, and to help smaller film crews and charities. When reporters asked how it felt to be back, he brushed it off, saying, "I've never really left." That line summed up his perspective perfectly. Fame was temporary, but purpose wasn't. For Keanu, John Wick was never just about violence or revenge. It was about survival, the act of standing up again after losing everything. He turned his personal pain into something universal. Fans around the world saw themselves in his quiet strength, in his refusal to let trauma define him. The movie wasn't a comeback. It was a reflection, proof that even after a decade of silence, kindness and discipline can rebuild a person. As John Wick grew into a global franchise, Keanu stayed the same man who rode the subway and smiled at strangers. He was grateful but grounded, never pretending that fame fixed anything. Success had returned, yes, but it didn't erase what he'd been through. It simply gave him a reason to keep going. And as the world rediscovered him through the lens of an action hero, they also began to realize something deeper, that his real strength had nothing to do with guns or choreography. It came from everything he endured, everything he survived, and the grace with which he carried it all. But what few people realized then was that John Wick wasn't the peak of his journey, it was a bridge. Because the next chapter in Keanu Reeves' life wouldn't be about career redemption or fame. It would be about rediscovering love, peace, and acceptance, not on screen, but in real life. After John Wick reignited his career, most people assumed Keanu Reeves would finally step back into the Hollywood spotlight. Instead, he went in the opposite direction. While studios celebrated his comeback, Keanu quietly redirected his energy toward giving back. He never announced it, never used social media to promote it, but behind the scenes, he had already been helping others for years. He donated millions to children's hospitals and cancer research centers, often under anonymous foundations. When asked why his name wasn't attached, he told a reporter once, "I don't like to attach my name. I just think it's the right thing to do." That line summed him up perfectly, doing good not for recognition, but because kindness had become his way of healing. What few fans knew was that Keanu had set up his own private foundation for cancer research long before John Wick ever existed. His sister Kim's battle with leukemia had changed how he saw money and success. Instead of investing in mansions or luxury, he quietly funded research programs, helped struggling families pay hospital bills, and continued supporting organizations that worked with children's health. These were not grand public gestures. He didn't stand on stages or give teary speeches, he just gave, then disappeared. Crew members from his films later revealed that he often handed out large bonuses to behind-the-scenes workers, the people Hollywood usually overlooks. One stunt coordinator from The Matrix described how Keanu bought motorcycles for the entire stunt team as a thank you. When the story spread, fans called it legendary, but Keanu just called it fair. Every time he made a successful movie, he seemed to find a way to turn part of that success into something that helped others. That quiet generosity became a part of his identity, even if he never tried to make it one. In interviews, he often avoided talking about himself and instead shifted the focus toward others, the crew, the fans, the process. Psychologists call that deflective empathy, when someone who has experienced deep loss finds meaning in helping others heal. For Keanu, giving wasn't an act of charity, it was a survival mechanism. His humility stood out even more in an industry obsessed with attention. When other stars sold brands and lifestyles, Keanu walked to film sets carrying his own bag. He ate with crew members instead of isolating himself in trailers. He still lived in a modest apartment and used public transport when he could. A few fans even spotted him waiting in line for coffee like anyone else, refusing offers to cut ahead. He had seen what power could do to people, and he wanted no part of it. That sincerity began to change how audiences saw him. He wasn't just a movie star anymore, he was a reminder that decency still existed. In a culture that rewards arrogance, his humility became his greatest form of rebellion. Fans from all over the world began sharing personal encounters, stories of how he'd stop to talk to them, listen to their problems, or give without expecting anything back. These weren't orchestrated moments. They were proof that even in one of the most superficial industries on Earth, a person could still lead with empathy. And the irony is, the more he avoided fame, the more famous he became. His name became synonymous with kindness, the internet's favorite person, as headlines called him. But Keanu never took that praise seriously. He knew the world loved the idea of him, not the reality of his life. He once said, "I'm just a regular guy trying to do my job." That modesty wasn't false, it was how he genuinely saw himself. Behind that simplicity was a truth many people miss. Keanu's generosity wasn't about money. It was about presence. He gave people attention, time, respect, the very things he lost growing up. It was his way of restoring balance in a world that had taken so much from him. And while others measured success in awards and wealth, Keanu measured it in small moments. A conversation, a smile, a quiet act that made someone's day a little better. But even with peace returning to his life, something unexpected was about to happen again. Something softer, something more human. After years of solitude and emotional distance, Keanu Reeves would finally find comfort in the one thing he had quietly avoided for decades: love. For nearly 2 decades, Keanu Reeves' personal life was defined by silence. After losing Jennifer Syme, he never publicly dated anyone, never sought attention, and rarely appeared at social events. Fans often speculated about his loneliness, but those close to him said he wasn't broken, he had simply learned to live without expectation. He found comfort in simplicity, reading, riding motorcycles, spending time with friends, and working on smaller film projects. For years, he avoided the subject of love entirely. When asked in interviews whether he was lonely, he replied, "You have to be happy being alone if you want to survive in this world." That statement wasn't sadness, and it was acceptance, the kind of peace that comes after surviving too much loss to chase temporary comfort. Then, quietly, something changed. In 2019, Keanu appeared at an art event in Los Angeles holding hands with artist and author Alexandra Grant. The photo immediately went viral, not because of scandal but because of surprise. Fans were shocked to see him open up publicly after decades of privacy. The media initially treated it like gossip, but the reaction quickly shifted. People were genuinely happy for him. Alexandra wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't part of the Hollywood machine. She was an artist, intellectual, and longtime collaborator who had co-authored books with Keanu years earlier. Their friendship had slowly grown into something deeper, built on mutual respect rather than fame. What made the world pay attention wasn't the relationship itself, it was how he handled it. He didn't use it for publicity. There were no staged photos, no magazine interviews, no social media posts. He simply walked beside her, hand in hand, as if to say, "This is my piece." That moment resonated deeply with fans because it represented something real love found not through fame, but through shared stillness. Alexandra, known for her intellect and calm presence, once said she admired Keanu's grace through chaos. The two shared the same quiet philosophy on life: do your work, stay kind, and protect what matters. Psychologists often describe people like Keanu as post-traumatic altruists, individuals who turn pain into empathy and find stability through connection rather than escape. This was exactly what happened in his relationship. For the first time in decades, Keanu allowed himself to be seen, not as an icon or a tragic figure, but as a man capable of peace. Their relationship wasn't about youth or status, it was about emotional safety. In a culture obsessed with image, their bond felt refreshingly human. Fans noticed the change. His interviews became lighter, his smiles more frequent. When asked about happiness, he didn't give deep philosophical answers. He simply said, "Everything's wonderful." That line, coming from a man who had endured so much pain, carried more weight than any long explanation could. It wasn't a performance, it was gratitude. Alexandra's presence also helped the public see Keanu differently. People who once saw him as the eternal loner now saw him as someone capable of healing, not by forgetting the past, but by learning to live with it. Their partnership challenged Hollywood's idea of perfection. She was older, independent, and unapologetically authentic, and Keanu admired that. Fans celebrated him for choosing someone real in an industry full of illusions. But what stands out most about this chapter of his life is how quietly powerful it is. There's no grand romance narrative, no dramatic comeback, just two people who found balance in each other's company. It's a reminder that sometimes peace doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives with stillness, understanding, and the feeling of being seen without judgment. Keanu's later life relationship also reflects the man he's become, someone who measures life by connection, not attention. He once said in an interview, "I don't need to be married to be committed." That statement wasn't about rejecting love, it was about defining it on his own terms. By the time the world started calling him the internet's favorite person, Keanu had already learned the truth. Fame fades, but kindness and genuine connection last. His relationship with Alexandra isn't a fairy tale, it's evidence that even after a lifetime of heartbreak, healing is possible. And as he continues working, smiling, and giving without noise, his story reminds us of something universal: that love doesn't erase pain, but it can make living with it a little easier. What came next would reveal the final layer of Keanu's quiet strength, a deeper look into how he turned all that grief, fame, and solitude into something powerful: wisdom. Because in the next chapter of his life, Keanu Reeves stopped trying to move past pain and started learning how to live with it. As Keanu Reeves grew older, his story stopped being about tragedy and started becoming a study in perspective. He wasn't just surviving pain anymore, he was learning from it. The losses, the isolation, the quiet years in between, they all shaped a worldview that set him apart from most celebrities. He once said, "Grief changes shape, but it never ends." That sentence has followed him for decades, not as a slogan, but as a way of living. He doesn't fight pain. He acknowledges it, learns from it, and carries it with dignity. And that's what makes him different. Where most people try to hide their scars, Keanu treats his as part of who he is. When asked in interviews about happiness, he rarely gives simple answers. Instead, he talks about gratitude, being thankful for ordinary things, breathing fresh air, talking to strangers, watching a sunrise. It sounds small, but for someone who's lost almost everyone close to him, those small things carry weight. He doesn't believe in perfection, he believes in presence. It's the kind of wisdom that only comes from pain that's been lived, not avoided. That calm energy people always mention in him, that quiet smile, those slow, thoughtful pauses before he speaks, it isn't an act. It's the result of a man who has accepted the world as it is, not as he wishes it to be. This mindset also affects how he approaches fame. He doesn't see himself as larger than life. In fact, he's often said he feels like a working actor, not a star. That humility isn't false modesty, it's a coping mechanism. By staying grounded, he avoids the same emotional chaos that destroyed so many of his peers. He's seen what happens when success becomes identity, and he refuses to let that happen to him. That's why he still walks to set like everyone else, eats with the crew, and deflects praise when it comes his way. He once said, "Money doesn't mean much to me. I've made a lot of it, but I want to enjoy life and help people." Those words aren't for effect, they're a philosophy rooted in experience. Psychologists describe people like Keanu as post-traumatic growers. They're individuals who experience deep loss but use it as a catalyst for maturity and meaning. That description fits him perfectly. His life isn't about moving on, it's about moving forward. The difference is subtle but powerful. Moving on means forgetting. Moving forward means carrying the lessons with you. And that's exactly what he's done. Instead of trying to rebuild the version of himself that existed before the pain, he built something new. Fans often say Keanu has a peaceful aura, but that peace was earned, not inherited. It came from years of reflection, acceptance, and letting go. He doesn't talk about revenge, regret, or what could have been. He focuses on what's still here, the people who remain, the work he loves, and the quiet joy of existing. His way of speaking, his generosity, even his simple gestures like listening attentively or shaking hands with fans, all of it comes from someone who's lived through emptiness and decided to fill it with compassion instead of anger. There's also something deeply human in how he talks about death. In one interview, when a host asked what he thinks happens when we die, he paused for a long time before answering, "I know that the ones who love us will miss us." That simple line became one of the most quoted sentences on the internet. It wasn't poetic, it was real. It showed how Keanu views mortality not as something to fear, but as something that gives life meaning. In a world obsessed with control, Keanu's philosophy is the opposite. He's learned to let go. He accepts that not everything can be fixed or understood, and that acceptance gives him peace. That's why he rarely shows frustration, even when things go wrong publicly. He's not detached, he's just free from illusion. When you've seen how fragile everything is, you stop clinging to it so tightly. By embracing pain instead of resisting it, Keanu Reeves turned his grief into wisdom and his losses into empathy. That transformation is what people really respond to, not his movies, not his fame, but his humanity. He became a reminder that peace isn't something you find after life gets easier. It's something you build when it doesn't. And that quiet strength is what defines him today. What came next would complete that transformation, the final stage of his journey. It wasn't about fame, money, or even redemption. It was about legacy. How one man's humility, built from years of struggle, turned into something much bigger than movies. Because for Keanu Reeves, the real story isn't how much he achieved, it's how much he gave. Today, Keanu Reeves stands as one of the most universally respected figures in modern entertainment, not because of awards, but because of the way he has lived. In a world that often celebrates ego and excess, he became a quiet example of what humility can look like at the highest level of success. His career has spanned nearly 4 decades, from Bill and Ted to The Matrix to John Wick. Yet his reputation has never depended on controversy, marketing, or image control. What makes him so admired is consistency. The same humility that defined him as a struggling actor in the 1980s is still the same energy he carries today. He treats everyone from studio executives to interns with equal respect, and that rare integrity has become his legacy. Fans and colleagues often describe him as unchanged. That word might seem simple, but in Hollywood, it's the ultimate compliment. Directors say he still shows up early, still does the work without complaint, and still listens more than he speaks. There's no entourage, no self-promotion, no need to prove anything. It's that steadiness that makes him stand out in an industry built on reinvention. When journalists ask how he stays grounded, his answer is always the same: gratitude. He says he's thankful just to work, to tell stories, to create. That kind of perspective only comes from someone who's already seen what it's like to lose everything that truly matters. His influence now extends far beyond film. He's become a symbol of emotional endurance, a reminder that kindness and authenticity can survive in even the harshest environments. Younger generations who never saw Speed or The Matrix still know his name, not because of nostalgia, but because of how he treats people. On social media, thousands of fans share stories of small encounters with him. A handshake, a smile, a moment of genuine attention. None of it is orchestrated, and that's why it resonates. He's living proof that you don't have to be loud to be legendary. Keanu's legacy is also about redefining strength. For decades, Hollywood portrayed toughness as arrogance and dominance. He flipped that idea on its head. His version of strength is compassion, patience, and resilience. Even his most iconic roles, Neo and John Wick, mirror that philosophy. Both characters fight not out of pride but out of love and loss. That's what connects people to him. They can sense that his performances come from somewhere real. When he moves, it's controlled. When he speaks, it's measured. When he grieves, it's silent. Every expression carries the weight of lived experience. Off-screen, his life continues to reflect the same quiet discipline. He doesn't chase headlines or trends. He rides his motorcycle through Los Angeles, supports small artists, funds medical research, and spends time with people who knew him long before the fame. When he does appear in public, he still stops to sign autographs patiently, talks to fans without rushing, and makes everyone feel like they matter. It's the same philosophy Dale Carnegie once wrote about. Make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. That sincerity is what has made Keanu Reeves one of the most beloved public figures of this generation. Yet, even with all the admiration, he doesn't seem to see himself as special. When interviewers bring up his legacy, he often laughs softly and says he just wants to keep doing good work. He doesn't believe in perfection or permanence. Art is about connection, he once said. If a story moves you, it's done its job. That statement could apply to his entire life. His story moves people not because it's glamorous, but because it's human. It reminds us that success without empathy is empty, and that pain, when carried with grace, can become purpose. His journey from an unstable childhood to international fame to personal tragedy and back to peace is rare, not because of the events, but because of how he responded to them. He didn't let anger define him. He didn't let loss destroy him. He let it teach him. That's why his reputation has lasted longer than most careers. The kindness wasn't a reaction to pain, it was the transformation of it. And that transformation is what people will remember long after the headlines fade. In the end, Keanu Reeves' legacy isn't about being the biggest star in Hollywood. It's about being proof that empathy can survive success, that strength can exist without arrogance, and that humility can outshine fame. He's shown that even when life takes everything, it can't take who you choose to be. For Keanu, the measure of a man isn't how high he climbs, but how quietly he lifts others along the way. And maybe that's why, after all the losses and heartbreaks, he still stands taller than ever, not as the richest man in Hollywood, but as the kind hero who lost everything and somehow found peace. Keanu Reeves has faced more loss than most people could imagine, yet he never let pain turn him bitter. Instead, he turned it into compassion. That's what makes his journey so powerful, not the movies he's made, but the humanity he's kept. So if you love Keanu Reeves not just for The Matrix, John Wick, or the fame that followed, but for the quiet goodness he represents, then let this be your moment to do something small that matters. Like this video not for numbers, not for clicks, but for the kind of goodness he represents.